The phone call that destroyed my marriage came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I was staring at my alarm clock, wondering if Claire had come home at all last night. The bed beside me was cold, undisturbed, like my wife's conscience. "Alain, it's Judge Morel. I need you here immediately. Something terrible has happened." I sat up, instantly alert. 20 years in the French Foreign Legion teaches you to recognize genuine panic in a man's voice. Judge Bertrand Morel, my employer for the past 5 years, was the kind of man who faced serious threats from convicted criminals with the composure of a chess master. If he was rattled, the world was ending. "On my way, Judge." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I dressed quickly in my usual gardener's uniform, khaki pants, work boots, and a polo shirt that had seen better decades. At 60, I'd learned that looking harmless was often more useful than looking dangerous. People underestimate the gardener. They see the dirt under my fingernails and assume I'm just another invisible service worker, someone who tends their roses and disappears until needed again. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 2 decades as a pioneer in the Legion, clearing minefields and building bridges in places most people couldn't pronounce. Now I pruned hedges and planted tulips for a suburban judge while my 38-year-old wife screwed around with men who probably couldn't change their own oil. Claire's car wasn't in the driveway. Again. Her latest research conference had apparently run very late, or very early, depending on how you looked at it. I drove my battered gardening van through the quiet streets of our Lyon suburb, past the manicured lawns and perfect facades that hid so much rot underneath. Just like my marriage. Judge Morel's estate sat on 2 acres of meticulously maintained grounds, my handiwork for the past 5 years. I'd transformed his property from suburban mediocrity into something resembling the gardens at Versailles, minus the tourists and pretension. The judge appreciated craftsmanship, whether in legal briefs or landscape design. I found him in his study, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled. On his desk sat a phone, a crumpled piece of paper, and what looked like a ransom note made from cut-out magazine letters. "They took Luke," he said without preamble. "Last night, after his soccer practice. They want me to reverse my verdict in the Marseille drug case, or—" He gestured helplessly at the note. Luke was 16, the judge's only son since his wife passed 3 years ago. A good kid who helped me in the garden sometimes, asking questions about my Legion days while we planted vegetables. Smart, curious, the kind of boy who deserved better than to become a pawn in some cartel's game. "What do the police say?" "They're treating it as a kidnapping, but they want me to cooperate with the criminal's demands while they investigate. They don't understand. If I reverse that verdict, 3 major drug dealers walk free, and every judge in France becomes a target." I studied the ransom note. The paper was cheap, the kind you'd find at any corner store. The letters were cut from fashion magazines. An interesting choice that suggested either a woman's involvement or someone trying to throw off investigators. "Judge, with your permission, I'd like to handle this differently." He looked at me with those sharp gray eyes that had intimidated countless criminals. "Alain, I know about your military background, but this isn't Afghanistan. This is France, and there are laws. There are also 16-year-old boys who don't deserve to die because their father believes in justice." I stood up, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. "Give me 24 hours. If I can't bring Luke home safely, we'll do this their way." The judge studied me for a long moment. "What do you need?" "Trust. And maybe you should call in sick today." I left the judge's house with a renewed sense of mission, but first I had to deal with the ongoing disaster of my personal life. Claire's car was in our driveway when I returned home, which meant she'd finally decided to grace me with her presence. I found her in the kitchen, making coffee with the casual air of someone who hadn't been absent all night. She wore the same black dress from yesterday, though it was considerably more wrinkled now. Her dark hair, usually perfectly styled, looked like she'd been running her hands through it. Or someone else had. "Morning, darling," she said without looking at me. "You're up early." "Work emergency. Where were you last night?" "I told you the conference ran late. Some of us stayed at the hotel to continue our discussions." Claire was a literature professor at the University of Lyon, specializing in modern French poetry. It was the kind of job that sounded impressive at dinner parties and paid about as much as my gardening work. The difference was, she thought her job made her intellectually superior to everyone else, especially me. "Which hotel?" She finally turned to face me, her green eyes flashing with irritation. "Really, Alain? Are we going to do this? I'm a grown woman. I don't need to account for every minute of my time." "Just curious about your research methods." "What's that supposed to mean?" I could have confronted her then. Could have mentioned the credit card statements I'd been seeing, the charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never stayed at. Could have asked about the phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, or the sudden increase in her conference schedule. Instead, I poured myself coffee and headed for the door. "Nothing. I've got work to do." "Alain?" Her voice softened, taking on that tone she used when she wanted something. "Are we okay? You've been distant lately." I paused at the threshold, looking back at the woman I'd married 10 years ago. She'd been 28 then, a graduate student working on her doctorate, impressed by my stories of foreign adventures and exotic places. I'd been 50, recently retired from the Legion, looking for a quieter life with someone who made me feel civilized again. Now she looked at me like I was a piece of furniture she'd grown tired of, but couldn't afford to replace. "We're fine, Claire. Just fine." I spent the morning making phone calls to old contacts, people who owed me favors or shared my particular skill set. The Legion creates bonds that don't break just because you retire. Within 2 hours, I had 3 solid leads on the kidnappers and a promise of backup if things went sideways. My first stop was a cafe in the old industrial district, where I met with Bastien Moreau. No relation to me, despite the name. Bastien had served with me in Chad and Djibouti, back when we were young enough to think we were invincible. Now he ran a small security company, the kind that asked few questions and provided discreet services for people with complicated problems. "So the gardener needs some gardening tools?" he asked, stirring sugar into his espresso. Bastien was 65, built like a fire hydrant, with scars that told stories he'd never share with civilians. "Something like that. What do you know about the Marseille drug case?" "Enough to know that Judge Morel made some very dangerous people very unhappy. Word is they've been planning something for weeks." "Any idea where they might take a 16-year-old boy?" Bastien pulled out his phone, scrolled through some messages. "Funny you should ask. My sources say there's been unusual activity at an old warehouse complex near the river. The kind of activity that involves cash payments and people who don't want to be seen." He slid a piece of paper across the table with an address. "Be careful, Alain. These aren't the kind of enemies we used to face. They don't follow rules of engagement. Neither do I when kids are involved." I spent the afternoon conducting surveillance on the warehouse, using techniques I'd learned tracking insurgents in places where mistakes meant body bags. The building was perfect for a kidnapping operation, isolated, multiple escape routes, and enough ambient noise from nearby construction to muffle screams. I counted 4 guards, rotating in predictable patterns. Professional criminals, but not professional soldiers. They were watching for police cars and obvious threats, not for a 60-year-old gardener in a work van. By evening, I had a plan. It wasn't complicated. The best plans never are. But first, I had to deal with another problem that had been festering for months. I arrived home to find Claire getting ready for another evening seminar. She wore a red dress I'd never seen before, expensive looking, the kind that required a special occasion or a special audience. "Working late again?" I asked. "Henri is presenting his research on philanthropic poetry initiatives. It's quite groundbreaking work." Henri Laurent. I'd heard that name increasingly often over the past few months. According to Claire, he was a fellow academic, a philanthropist, and apparently the most fascinating man in the field of modern French literature. According to my own research, he was also married, wealthy, and had a reputation for collecting young female colleagues like rare books. "Sounds riveting. What time should I expect you home?" "Don't wait up. These things can run quite late." She kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like a dismissal than affection. Her perfume was different too, something expensive and cloying that made my nose itch. After she left, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the evidence I'd been collecting for weeks. Credit card statements showing dinners for two at expensive restaurants, hotel charges in cities where Claire claimed to be attending conferences alone, phone records showing hours of calls to Henri's number, often late at night. My wife was having an affair. It was obvious, pathetic, and entirely predictable. The middle-aged professor seducing the younger academic wife, probably promising her a more sophisticated life than the one she'd settled for with an ex-soldier turned gardener. The irony was that Claire thought she was being clever, that I was too simple to figure it out. She'd forgotten that I'd spent 20 years in intelligence work, tracking people who were actually trying to hide their activities. Following an unfaithful spouse was child's play compared to hunting terrorists in the Sahara. But tonight, I had more pressing concerns. A 16-year-old boy was depending on me, and I'd never failed a mission yet. I changed into black clothes, loaded my van with equipment I hadn't used in years, and drove toward the warehouse district. The streets were empty except for the occasional police patrol, which I avoided easily. Old habits. The warehouse looked exactly as it had during my afternoon surveillance, except now there were lights in the windows and the sound of voices carrying across the empty lot. I parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, moving through shadows with the muscle memory of 100 similar operations. The guards were exactly where I expected them to be. The first one was smoking by the loading dock, his attention focused on his phone rather than his surroundings. I approached from behind, using a sleeper hold I'd learned in basic training 35 years ago. He went down without a sound. The second guard was patrolling the perimeter, following the same route he'd used all day. I intercepted him near a dumpster, using a combination of surprise and superior positioning to neutralize him quickly. 2 down, 2 to go. The third guard was inside, visible through a grimy window. He was playing cards with someone I couldn't see, probably guard number 4. This required a more creative approach. I found the building's electrical panel and eliminated the power, plunging the warehouse into darkness. Then I waited, counting seconds until I heard confused voices and the sound of flashlights clicking on. "What the hell happened to the lights?" "Check the breaker box. Probably just a blown fuse." Perfect. I moved to the rear entrance, picking the lock with tools I'd kept sharp despite years of retirement. The door opened silently, and I slipped inside. The warehouse was larger than it appeared from outside, filled with shipping containers and construction equipment. I could hear voices coming from a makeshift office area in the far corner, where battery-powered lanterns cast dancing shadows on the walls. "This is taking too long," someone was saying in accented French. "Call the judge again. Tell him we're running out of patience." "The boy's been quiet for hours. Maybe we should check on him." "He's fine. Kids sleep a lot." I followed the voices, moving between containers like a ghost. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd done in a dozen countries against enemies far more dangerous than these amateur kidnappers. I found Luke in a storage room near the office, tied to a chair, but apparently unharmed. He looked up when I entered, his eyes wide with surprise and hope. "Mr. Moreau, how did you—" Quiet, I whispered, cutting his bonds with a utility knife. Can you walk? He nodded, rubbing circulation back into his wrists. There are 4 of them. They have guns. Not anymore, they don't. I led Luke toward the rear exit, moving carefully to avoid the areas where the remaining guards were arguing about the power failure. We were almost to the door when one of them decided to check on their prisoner. Merde! The kid's gone! Suddenly, the warehouse erupted in shouting voices and running footsteps. Flashlight beams swept the darkness, searching for us. This way, I whispered to Luke, guiding him toward a loading dock on the far side of the building. We could hear our pursuers behind us, getting closer. We reached the dock just as the first guard rounded a corner, his flashlight beam catching us in its glare. He shouted something in what sounded like Arabic and reached for his weapon. I threw my utility knife, a skill I'd perfected during my Legion days. It caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun clattering across the concrete floor. He went down screaming. Run! I told Luke, pushing him toward the dock door. We burst out into the night air, sprinting across the empty lot toward my van. Behind us, more voices were shouting, and I could hear car engines starting up. Get in! I yelled, throwing Luke into the passenger seat and gunning the engine. We tore out of the warehouse district with 2 cars in pursuit, their headlights blazing in my rearview mirror. I took side streets and back alleys, using my knowledge of the city to lose them in a maze of residential neighborhoods. 20 minutes later, we pulled into Judge Morell's driveway. The house was dark except for a single light in the study window, where I could see the judge's silhouette waiting for news. Is it over? Luke asked as we sat in the van, both of us breathing hard. The kidnapping part is, but this isn't finished yet. Judge Morell met us at the door, embracing his son with tears in his eyes. It was the first time I'd ever seen the composed magistrate show such raw emotion. How can I ever repay you? He asked. You can't, but you can help me with something else. I spent the next hour explaining my situation to the judge, Claire's affair, Henry's involvement, and my plans for dealing with both problems. Judge Morell listened with the same attention he gave to complex legal cases, asking pointed questions and offering practical advice. You realize that what you're proposing could have serious legal consequences? He warned. Only if I get caught, and I've had a lot of practice not getting caught. The judge smiled grimly. In that case, you might find these useful. He handed me a folder containing financial records, tax documents, and what appeared to be an audit report. Henri Laurent's philanthropic foundation has been under investigation for months. It seems his charitable donations aren't as charitable as they appear. I flipped through the documents, seeing a pattern of embezzlement, tax fraud, and money laundering that would make a cartel accountant proud. Henri had been stealing from his own charity, using the funds to finance his lifestyle and impress women like my wife. This is perfect. How did you... I have friends in the prosecutor's office. They've been building a case against Mr. Laurent for some time. They just needed the right moment to act. And that moment is? Whenever you're ready to provide it. I drove home as dawn was breaking over Lyon, feeling more alive than I had in years. The rescue mission had reminded me who I used to be before I became the invisible gardener married to an unfaithful wife. But now, it was time to remind everyone else. Claire was asleep when I entered our bedroom, still wearing the red dress from her evening with Henri. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, and she smelled like expensive wine and another man's cologne. I stood there for a moment, looking at the woman who'd promised to love and honor me 10 years ago. She'd kept neither promise, but that was about to change. I showered, changed clothes, and made coffee, planning my next moves with the same methodical precision I'd used to plan military operations. By the time Claire woke up, I was ready. "You're up early again," she said, stumbling into the kitchen in her wrinkled dress. "Big day ahead. How was Henry's presentation?" She froze for just a moment, but recovered quickly. "Fascinating. He's doing important work in community outreach." I'm sure he is. What kind of outreach? Poetry programs for underprivileged youth, art therapy, creative expression, that sort of thing. I nodded thoughtfully. Sounds expensive. Good thing he has that foundation to fund it. Claire poured coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Yes, he's very committed to helping others. I bet he is. Claire, we need to talk. She turned to face me, and for the first time in months, I had her complete attention. About what? About us. About where this marriage is going. About whether you want to keep lying to me. The color drained from her face. I don't know what you mean. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photograph I'd taken the previous week. Claire and Henri entering a hotel together, his hand on her lower back, her face turned up to his with an expression she hadn't shown me in years. This kind of lying. Claire stared at the photo for a long moment, then sat down heavily at our kitchen table. How long have you known? Months. The question is, how long has it been going on? Since spring. It wasn't supposed to happen, Alain. It just did. Nothing just happens, Claire. You made choices. You chose to betray our marriage, to lie to me, to sneak around like a teenager. Tears started running down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. I'd used up all my sympathy during the lonely nights when she was with him. I never meant to hurt you. You meant to deceive me. The hurt was inevitable. She looked up at me with desperate eyes. Can we fix this? Can we try counseling or... No. The finality in my voice seemed to shock her. No? Just like that? Just like that. But before we discuss divorce terms, there's something else we need to talk about. Your boyfriend's financial situation. I spread the documents from Judge Morel across the table, watching Claire's face as she read through them. Her expression went from confusion to horror to panic in the space of 30 seconds. Where did you get these? Does it matter? What matters is that Henri has been stealing from his own charity for years. Money that was supposed to help underprivileged children has been paying for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and gifts for his various mistresses. You're lying. I'm many things, Claire, but I'm not a liar, unlike some people in this room. She stared at the documents, her hands shaking. This can't be right. Henri is a good man. He cares about helping people. Henri cares about helping himself, and now you're going to help me expose him. I won't do it. I won't betray someone I care about. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You'll betray your husband of 10 years, but you won't betray your lover of 6 months? That's touching, Claire, really. That's different. You're right. It is different. Because Henri is a criminal, and I'm just the man who's been supporting you, housing you, and loving you while you screwed around behind my back. Claire stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. Actually, you do, because in about an hour, I'm calling the prosecutor's office and turning over all of this evidence. The only question is whether you're implicated as an accomplice. Her face went white. Accomplice? I didn't know anything about this. Prove it. Help me expose him. Make a statement to the prosecutors and distance yourself from his crimes. Or don't. And let them figure out how much you knew about where the money for your hotel rooms was coming from. Claire sank back into her chair, the fight going out of her. You bastard. You're enjoying this. I'm enjoying justice. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the documents that would destroy her lover's life. Finally, she looked up at me with something like respect in her eyes. You planned this, all of it. I'm a thorough man, Claire. You should have remembered that before you decided to cheat on me. What do you want me to do? I want you to call Henri and arrange a meeting. Tell him you need to see him urgently, that something's happened with your husband. Set it up for this afternoon, somewhere public. And then? Then you're going to help me give him the surprise of his life. The meeting was set for 3 p.m. at a cafe in the University District, a place where Henri would feel comfortable and confident. I arrived an hour early, positioning myself at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and the street outside. Claire arrived first, looking nervous and overdressed in a designer suit I'd never seen before. Probably another gift from Henri, bought with stolen charity money. She sat at a table near the window, checking her phone every few seconds. Henri arrived exactly on time, which told me something about his personality. He was the kind of man who valued punctuality and control, who probably planned his affairs as carefully as his business meetings. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of polished good looks that appealed to women who thought sophistication was measured in expensive clothes and cultured accents. His suit probably cost more than I made in a month, and his shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. I watched him kiss Claire on both cheeks, the casual intimacy of lovers who thought they were safe from discovery. He sat down across from her, leaning forward to speak in low, confidential tones. Claire was playing her part perfectly, looking distressed and vulnerable. She showed him something on her phone, probably the photos I'd given her, and I saw his face change from concern to alarm. That was my cue. I stood up and walked over to their table, pulling out the chair next to Henri before he could object. "Good afternoon, Henri. I'm Alain Moreau, Claire's husband. We need to talk." Henri's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally a kind of arrogant defiance that told me everything I needed to know about his character. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said in accented English, probably trying to intimidate me with his education. "The only misunderstanding is yours. You thought you could steal from children's charities and sleep with other men's wives without consequences. You were wrong." I placed a copy of the financial documents on the table between us. Henri glanced at them, and I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. "I don't know what you think you found, but I've found evidence of embezzlement, tax fraud, and money laundering. I've also found evidence that you've been using stolen charity funds to finance your affairs with married women." Henri looked around the cafe, probably calculating his chances of leaving without creating a scene. "You can't prove any of this." "I don't have to prove it. The prosecutors will do that. But I can make your life very unpleasant in the meantime." I pulled out my phone and showed him a video I'd recorded that morning. Henri's expensive car parked outside a hotel, with a clear timestamp showing it was there during hours when he should have been at his office. "Interesting schedule you keep. I have dozens of these videos, Henri. Months of surveillance showing your patterns, your habits, your meetings with my wife." Claire was staring at me with something like awe. "You've been following us for months?" "I've been gathering evidence for months. There's a difference." Henri tried to regain control of the conversation. "What do you want? Money? I can pay you to keep quiet about this." "You want to bribe me? With stolen charity money?" I laughed, loud enough to attract attention from other tables. "That's perfect. Henri Laurent, philanthropist and child advocate, trying to buy his way out of a scandal with money he stole from underprivileged kids." "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "Why? Afraid someone might overhear? Afraid your reputation might suffer?" I stood up, still speaking in a voice that carried across the cafe. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Henri Laurent, director of the Children's Future Foundation. He's been stealing money meant for disadvantaged youth and using it to seduce married women." The cafe had gone quiet, all eyes on our table. Henri's face was red with embarrassment and rage. "You're insane," he whispered. "I'm thorough, and I'm just getting started." I pulled out a thick manila envelope and dropped it on the table. Inside, you'll find copies of financial records, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and photographs documenting your embezzlement and your affair with my wife. One copy is going to the prosecutor's office this afternoon. Another copy is going to the board of directors of your foundation. A third copy is going to the local newspaper. Henri grabbed for the envelope, but I was faster. pulling it back before he could reach it. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to handle this differently. What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice. You can resign from your foundation, confess to the embezzlement, make full restitution to the charity, and disappear from my wife's life permanently. Or you can fight this publicly and lose everything anyway, plus face criminal charges. Henri looked at Claire, probably hoping for support, but she was staring at the table, unable to meet his eyes. Claire, he said softly. I can't help you, she whispered. I can't be involved in this. Henri's face crumpled as he realized he was alone, abandoned by his lover and outmaneuvered by the husband he'd underestimated. You have 24 hours to decide, I told him. After that, the choice is out of your hands. I stood up to leave, then paused and looked back at him. Oh, and Henri, stay away from my wife. If I see you near her again, I'll make sure the prosecutors know she was your willing accomplice in the embezzlement. I'm sure they'd be very interested in how much she knew about where the money for your hotel rooms came from. I left them sitting there, Henri staring at the documents that would destroy his life, Claire crying quietly into her hands. It wasn't quite the revenge I'd planned, but it was a good start. The next morning, Henri's resignation letter was on the front page of the local newspaper, along with a detailed confession of his embezzlement and a promise to make full restitution to the Children's Future Foundation. The story painted him as a man overcome by personal problems who had made terrible mistakes and was now trying to make amends. It was a careful piece of public relations designed to minimize criminal charges while maximizing public sympathy. Henri was smarter than I'd given him credit for, but not smart enough to avoid the trap entirely. Claire read the newspaper article over breakfast, her hands shaking slightly as she turned the pages. He's ruined, she said quietly. He ruined himself. I just helped expose it. What happens now? Now we get divorced. You move out of my house, we divide our assets, and we go our separate ways. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Just like that? Just like that. Don't you want to try to work things out? Don't you still love me? I considered the question seriously, looking at the woman I'd married 10 years ago. She was still beautiful, still intelligent, still capable of making me feel things I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. But she was also a stranger now, someone who'd chosen to betray everything we'd built together. I loved the woman I married, I said finally. But that woman doesn't exist anymore. Claire started crying again, the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that might have moved me 6 months ago. Now they just sounded like self-pity. I made a mistake, Alain. People make mistakes. People make mistakes. You made choices. There's a difference. I finished my coffee and headed for the door. I had work to do at Judge Morell's house, gardens to tend, normal life to resume. But first, I had one more stop to make. I found Henri at his apartment, an expensive place in the university district that he probably wouldn't be able to afford much longer. He answered the door looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight, his usually perfect appearance disheveled and defeated. What do you want now? He asked. To make sure we understand each other. I pushed past him into the apartment, noting the expensive furniture, the original artwork, the wine collection that probably cost more than most people made in a year, all of it bought with money stolen from children's charities. Nice place. Shame you'll have to give it up to pay restitution. Henri closed the door and turned to face me, some of his old arrogance returning. You've won, Moreau. I've lost my job, my reputation, probably my freedom. What more do you want? I want to make sure you understand that this isn't over. Resigning from your foundation and making a public confession was just the beginning. What do you mean? I mean I'm going to be watching you, Henri. For the rest of your life, I'm going to be watching. If you try to start another charity, I'll be there. If you try to seduce another man's wife, I'll be there. If you try to rebuild your reputation, I'll be there to remind everyone what you really are. Henri's face went pale. You can't do that. That's harassment. Prove it. I'm just a concerned citizen keeping an eye on a known embezzler. There's nothing illegal about that. I walked over to his wine collection, examining the labels with interest. Chateau Margaux 1996. Very nice. Probably worth about 2,000 euros. How many hungry children could that feed, do you think? Get out of my apartment. I'm leaving. But remember what I said, Henry. I'll be watching. I headed for the door, then paused and looked back at him. Oh, and Henri? If you ever contact my wife again, for any reason, I'll make sure the prosecutors know about the Swiss bank accounts you thought you'd hidden so well. His face went white. How did you... I'm very thorough, Henri. Don't forget that. I left him standing there, probably wondering how much more I knew about his criminal activities. The answer was everything. Judge Morel's contacts in the prosecutor's office had been very helpful in that regard. The divorce proceedings took 3 months, during which Claire tried repeatedly to reconcile. She sent letters, left voicemails, even showed up at Judge Morel's house while I was working. Each time, I told her the same thing. It was over, and nothing she could say or do would change that. She tried anger, tears, seduction, and finally, resignation. In the end, she signed the papers and moved out of our house, taking only her personal belongings and half our modest savings. She didn't fight for more, probably because she knew I had enough evidence of her affair to make any contested divorce very unpleasant for her. The last time I saw her was at the final hearing, where she sat across the courtroom looking lost and defeated. She'd aged in the months since our confrontation at the cafe, losing the confident arrogance that had once attracted me. She looked like what she was, a middle-aged woman who'd made terrible choices and was finally facing the consequences. After the judge signed the final decree, she approached me in the hallway outside the courtroom. I'm moving to Paris, she said quietly. I got a position at the Sorbonne. Good luck with that. Alain, I want you to know that I really did love you. I still do. No, Claire. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a husband who was different from the other academics, someone with stories and experiences they couldn't match. But you never loved me enough to stay faithful. She started to say something else, but I walked away. There was nothing left to discuss. 6 months later, I received a newspaper clipping in the mail with no return address. The headline read, "Former charity director sentenced to 5 years in prison." The article detailed Henri's conviction on multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud, noting that he'd stolen over 2 million euros from children's charities over a period of 4 years. The article mentioned that Henri had initially cooperated with prosecutors and made partial restitution, but that additional evidence had come to light suggesting the scope of his crimes was much larger than originally believed. He would serve his sentence in a minimum security facility and would be required to pay full restitution upon his release. I filed the clipping away with the rest of my divorce papers, then went back to work in Judge Morel's garden. It was spring, time for planting new flowers and pruning the wood from last year's growth. Luke helped me that afternoon, as he often did since the kidnapping incident. He was taller now, more confident, with the kind of quiet strength that reminded me of his father. "Mr. Moreau," he said as we planted roses along the garden wall, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret what you did? With the kidnappers, I mean, and with your wife?" I thought about the question as I worked, considering the events of the past year and their consequences. Henri was in prison, Claire was in Paris, and I was alone in a house that felt more peaceful than it had in years. Regret is for people who make mistakes, Luke. I didn't make any mistakes. But don't you miss being married? Don't you get lonely? I looked at the boy, seeing genuine concern in his eyes. He'd grown up a lot since his ordeal, developing the kind of empathy that comes from understanding how quickly life can change. I miss being married to the woman I thought Claire was, I said finally, but that woman never really existed. As for being lonely, I've got good work, good friends, and the satisfaction of knowing I handled a difficult situation with honor. And the kidnappers? Do you regret hurting them? Luke, some people in this world prey on the innocent. They take what doesn't belong to them, hurt people who can't defend themselves, and destroy lives for their own benefit. When you encounter people like that, you have two choices. You can be their victim, or you can stop them. So you don't regret it? I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing what needed to be done. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warming our backs as we tended the garden that had become my refuge and my purpose. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The house was quiet, peaceful, in a way it hadn't been during the final years of my marriage. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Judge Morel, calling from his office. Alain, I wanted you to know that the last of the kidnappers was sentenced today. 5 to 10 years, plus deportation after they serve their time. Good. How's Luke handling it? Better than I expected. He's resilient, like someone else I know. I smiled at the compliment. He's a good kid, Judge. You raised him right. I had help. Alain, I want you to know that what you did for my family will never be forgotten. If you ever need anything at all, you just have to ask. I appreciate that, Judge, but I've got everything I need. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and considered the truth of that statement. I had meaningful work, a comfortable home, and the respect of people I cared about. I had the satisfaction of knowing I'd protected an innocent boy and exposed two people who'd betrayed everything they claimed to stand for. Most importantly, I had my self-respect back. For too many years, I'd allowed myself to become invisible. The faithful husband who ignored obvious signs of betrayal, the former soldier who'd grown soft and complacent in suburban comfort. But when it mattered, when a child's life was at stake and justice needed to be served, I'd remembered who I really was. Not just the gardener, not just the cuckolded husband, but a man who'd spent 20 years protecting the innocent and punishing the guilty. I finished my wine and went inside, locking the door behind me. Tomorrow I would tend the judge's garden, help Luke with his homework, and continue building the quiet, honest life I'd chosen for myself. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully in my own bed, in my own house, with the knowledge that I'd faced my enemies and defeated them completely. Henri was in prison, Claire was in exile, and the kidnappers were behind bars where they belonged. It wasn't the ending I'd planned when I married Claire 10 years ago, but it was the ending I deserved. Sometimes justice isn't about forgiveness or second chances. Sometimes justice is simply about making sure that actions have consequences, that betrayal has a price, and that good men don't have to suffer in silence. I'd learned that lesson in the Legion, forgotten it during my marriage, and remembered it when it mattered most. Now, at 61, I was finally free to be the man I'd always been underneath. Someone who protected the innocent, punished the guilty, and never, ever backed down from a fight. The garden would bloom again in spring, and so would I.